encodes that into ones and zeros. It transmits that through the wire to the CPU in your computer. And your computer then decodes that into the letter A, which it displays on the screen. Another example of this, I've got me, and I'm using the rules of blueprinting. I have created a message of a house. Now I'm going to send that to a contractor, and he is going to decode that message into a house. So the house is the decoded message in this example. And then finally, we have the genetic code. You've got a stretch of DNA that is a message is produced from that DNA is encoded into RNA. That RNA then meets up with the ribosome, and the ribosome is a special molecule in our cells that decodes messages in RNA, and it decodes them into proteins. So what you could say here is that the genome, the gene, is telling the ribosome how to build a protein. And it uses the genetic code to do that. The genetic code is the set of rules that the genome uses to communicate with the ribosome. To the next slide here. So, yeah, questions from anyone?
I don't have any questions. I mean, I've got refutations for everything you just said. I've taken notes, but I want to wait till you're done with your presentation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are there any live
Unless you want to
chat
dive into it
questions
now,
or
it's up to
clarifications?
you.
Kyle, did you see any
No,
live
because
chat
I know what his
questions?
argument. I don't have any questions. I know what his argument is.
There was
that's why
one that
Okay.
said that asked if the Nazis'
done.
Enigma, would he consider the Nazis' Enigma a cipher or a code?
That's a
That's the
cipher.
only one that I've.
It's one symbol. So I mean, it's a symbol that we understand. So it's yeah.
The way that the Enigma machine worked is the Enigma machine had to be set up exactly from one specific condition for the wheels. There was trillions of different combinations it had. And so even if the allies or the enemy or whatever got a hold of this machine, they wouldn't know the initial configuration to do the algorithm, because this is what a cipher is. If you know the algorithm, like that Caesar shift, where you just, like, say, shift one to the left, each letter, you know how to decipher it. But that's what the Enigma machine did, but you had to know the initial configuration of it. That was a cipher, not a code.
So
John,
sorry, what's that?
you still have more for your presentation? You still have more?
Well, yeah, I've got quite a bit more, but I guess I want to understand. So you think that what is the difference between encryption and coding in your mind?
Okay, so let me kind of go through your thing and I'll get to that. If you're talking about a digital code, it is definitely digital, right? It's not an analog component to this. Digital means discrete, so we're talking about the Shannon information of bits, which is like 00, 01, 10, 11. That's clearly digital. Agreed?
Mm-hmm.
So when
Yeah.
Dawkins is talking about that, that's what he's referring to. Those four symbols, the A, T, G, and C, which is the genetic code that we both agree that part is a code. Those symbols can be represented via Shannon information by 2 bits. That's why it's digital. That's why he calls it digital.
He calls it a quaternary. Dawkins calls it a quaternary code. Yeah.
Right.
Specifically, he calls it a quaternary code. CODE.
Right. But as I explained, heuristically, we use language with these words because there are limitations on how we express things. Just because something used a word code does not necessarily, in strict definition, make it a code. It's a way to explain things by use of analogy.
I need to interrupt for a second to get both of you to clarify something for the sake of me and everybody in the audience. Yeah. What is the difference between a cipher and a code? Just very concisely, so that we can make
can
sure
go first,
that.
And then if he wants, do you want to explain that, and then I'll explain it?
Well,
from my perspective, it looks like there's
I'm curious
semantic
to hear
arguments.
what you think. Yeah, I'm curious to hear. I'm curious to see what you think because
it seems semantic to me.
No, they're not. A lot of people use the terms interchangeably,
Why?
and they're not. It's especially like encode or encrypt. They use them interchangeably.
Why?
That's not. To encrypt means to go through an algorithm. A code is this. Again, this is what a true code is. I take a primary symbol, like the word car, and I want to convey that to Shannon, and I want her to know. Let me start again. The word nuclear weapon. I want to convey to her a nuclear weapon, and I don't want John to know what the hell I'm talking about. like he doesn't now. No, I'm just kidding. But I want to take that and I want to convert it to a code. And I say, okay, the word I'm going to use, which is conveying meaning, codes convey some kind of meaning, like the word car has some kind of meaning, right? It's readable.
So
it's
by your
like
definition, are all codes
like
linguistic? All codes
are semantically linguistic. Yes, all codes are semantically linguistic.
So it's all about transmitting an image or some sort of information. So right, if something isn't linguistic, it by your definition can't be a code because codes only exist linguistically.
Right, that symbol, that's those 3 letters, CAR, represent the one symbol, one object that represents nuclear weapon. In order to you to know what the hell I'm talking about, you need that code book that says car equals nuclear weapon. In the days of
so it's about transcription from so it's about transcription from the initial item. You would transcribe that into something, and then
something else. Right.
The object is for me to use some sort of cipher in order to be able to enter into my cognition that's what you're trying to transmit.
No, you don't use the cipher. You don't use a cipher.
So
you need a code book. For example, I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example. Right.
See, this is why it's so semantic. So, but if it's only linguistic, it's not.
But let me give you an example.
Why not?
Back in the day, it cost money to send things through telephony. It was very costly, right? And so instead of having a long sentence that meant something, they used in accounting, they would say like you bounce the books for this whatever, okay? Instead of writing out bounce the books for it, they would have one word, and that one word would be like quaternary. And I think quaternary was one of the words they used in the code book. So if the receiver had that word quaternary, they knew what it meant to be like in the exact phrase. It's a way of shortening it down. That's what a code is. Okay. A cipher is different. A cipher, again, is a one-to-one a bit correspondence to one letter to one thing. For example, CAR, if I shift those one to the left, I'll end up with DBS, right? So that's ciphering. Right? And if I want to decipher it, I just have to know the algorithm. And the algorithm is shift each letter to the left. I don't need a code book. I just have to know the algorithm, the key it's called. That's the huge difference. A code book is very big, but an algorithm and cipher is just, what is it? Shift to the left.
So the difference is the method of encoding and the method of decryption.
Correct.
So,
coding is
it's the same thing.
A word level.
To me, that seems semantic.
Ciphering is an individual letter. There's a huge difference there. If I want to encode something, I'm going to code a word.
Actually not.
If I want to cipher, I cipher each letter at a time.
All right. Okay.
John.
Thank you for that clarification. John, go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm going to mute myself. I just wanted, for the sake of my sanity and everybody in the chats, I just needed to get that out of the way.
I want to clarify one other point. Because I'm using that for code, it actually does work as well for cipher. Cipher is in some ways linguistically as well. The problem is that neither one of these, by all definitions, are either a code or a cipher. They're pseudocode, pseudocipher. It really depends, again, what definitions you want to use for these things. So in any true form, DNA is not even a true cipher in that regard either. But it's close enough. I think it's more closer to a cipher than a code.
All right.
So
John,
ASCII is a cipher.
You're saying the genetic code. You're saying the genetic code is a cipher, not a code. And that binary code is a cipher, not a code, and that Morse code is a cipher, not a code.
Yes, and ASCII is a cipher as well.
So all the things that computer scientists call codes, they're wrong.
It's just stuck. It's just a term that's stuck. It's one of those. There's a lot of things in science that people had bad terminology that just stuck. We call it the Big Bang. It's not a bang, right?
So the people that invented code were wrong for calling it code.
No.
The people that invented and named it originally were wrong until you came here and corrected them.
This is validatable. Anybody can go validate on Google. We have something called Google now. Go look it up. Morse code, ASCII, not a code. Go look at Morse code. I have different pages of Morse code. They call it a cipher, and some of them call it the Morse code cipher. So there is evidence for this. I'm not just like pulling this out of my keister here. So, but I want to address his syllogism.
Keister doesn't mean keister, Steve. Keister doesn't mean keister. All right. But listen, we're going to go to John because he hasn't been on his
Sure.
Yes,
So-
for a while.
But I do have other things I want
Okay.
to address with them.
So the most important
Okay.
thing with understanding is, and again, the only reason that people think that genetic code is not a code, except for you, you are a special case, the only person in the world that doesn't accept codes as being codes. Aside from that,
Wait on.
aside from
That
that,
was rhetorical. That was rhetorical. Hold on. We're going to let you respond. Go ahead, John.
You'll get a chance to. I can't mute
Aside-
Steve for the record.
aside from Steve not accepting the definitions of computer science and Claude Shannon, if we look at the people who invented these codes, they call them codes, and they have since the start. All of these codes, the reason that many atheists have an issue with this is because of this creationist argument. For some reason, atheists think that because creationists make an argument, we should throw away our language and stop calling the genetic code a code. I do not agree with this. The actual issue with that creationist argument is the second claim that they make, their second premise, when they say that all codes that we know of were intelligently designed. That is false. It is true that the genetic code is a code, but it's not true that all codes are intelligently designed. And so if we go to the next slide, we're going to look at some codes that have evolved. There is a field of biology called signaling theory, of evolutionary biology, which studies the evolution of communication systems. And it turns out that every time you get symbiosis to evolve between two organisms, you also get the evolution of a new communication system. So here on the left, we've got a goby and a shrimp. This is a pistol shrimp. I don't know if you know the story about these guys, but the shrimp is really good at digging, but it doesn't have very good eyesight. And they'll team up with a goby. They'll dig in this nice burrow. They'll live in it together. And when the two go out to get food, they actually eat different foods. The goby mainly eats meat, and the shrimp mainly eats algae. They'll go out looking around for food. And when something dangerous comes by, the goby will signal by wiggling its tail that there's a danger, and the shrimp and the goby will both go back into their little cave. And there's a lot of complicated communication that's going on between these two organisms. It's really cool because you can actually get these in your aquarium and you can study it at home. Like they actually sell these at the pet store. It's amazing. Bacteria also have very complex communication systems, which we'll talk about here. They do, among other things, something called quorum sensing, where they send out communication molecules just to basically say, hey, I'm present. And the other bacteria can receive that, and they can get a sense of how many other bacteria there are in the population. And the reason that I bring this up is that there is no thinking involved here. Communication does not have to involve thinking. It does not have to involve a brain. The shrimp and the goby, they both have brains. We're used to inventing communication systems with our brains. Someone just sat down and invented binary code. Someone just sat down and invented Morse code. But communication systems and the codes that govern them can actually, a code being the set of rules governing a communication system, these things can evolve. And I'll actually talk about how this evolved in bacteria. But these bacteria, once they have received enough signals from their neighbors, once there's a lot of signals hitting them, certain genes inside their genome will turn off and others will turn on, and they'll start changing their behavior. And they'll do things in a group that are better to do in a group than alone. They'll excrete digestive enzymes, for example. And as a group, they'll excrete all these digestive enzymes at the same time, and that'll allow them to accomplish more together than they could have ever done alone. And they wait until the time is right, and they use this communication system to figure out when that time is right. Here, we've got golden jackals. Golden jackals, like all dogs, have an extremely complicated communication system that is molecular-based. You seem to be stuck on symbols having to be letters or something like that, but symbols can be anything. These dogs are using molecules in their urine to communicate to each other, and they're communicating all sorts of complicated things to each other when they're in heat. If they're in heat, they're communicating whether or not they're actually available. There are all sorts of things they're communicating, not just by the molecules that are in their urine, but also how they're marking in different areas. a very complicated communication system that's studied by people